Today, we're very excited to have such a special guest with us, one of the most courageous investigative journalists and public policy experts in the country, Heather McDonald. Heather takes hard data and she uses that data to craft compelling stories and make substantial public policy arguments that moves the ball and creates real change. Our mission at OpenTheBooks.com is much the same. To that end, last year, in the terms of the capturing of hard data, our auditors filed 41,500 Freedom of Information Act requests. Here's what our database is comprised of. Nearly all federal spending since the year 2001, 49 out of 50 state checkbooks, and in the municipal level units of government, 23 million public employees' salary and pension records. Just a quick update on our mission. In January, we filed a lawsuit in California to go after the last state that won't produce their state checkbook. Here's the update on our case. We expect to have the judge weigh in on this before the end of the year, and we expect to win and force open the California state checkbook. In February, the president, twice in his budget to Congress, he cited our oversight work at OpenTheBooks.com and an entire new chapter on eliminating wasteful spending. The White House called me and told me that our mission at OpenTheBooks.com was the inspiration for that first ever chapter. In March, our world changed and we moved immediately to a war footing, giving oversight to the agencies and entities and actors looking to jump on the coronavirus gravy train on the bailouts. So our mission today, after $4 trillion of bailout, is more important than ever. So when AOC proposed a $4 billion bailout of America's museums, our piece at Forbes got 100,000 views. We have exposed the wealthiest colleges and universities. Those schools, 25 of the largest, have third of $1 trillion in their endowments, and they stood to reap $1 billion worth of bailout. We partnered with USA Today and exposed the largest charitable hospitals that did not have a legitimate claim to their coronavirus bailout. We mapped the mega loans of the Paycheck Protection Program, and we made those are the loans between $1 million and $10 million. Some of those were going to the companies owned by even the Hollywood elites, and we made the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. Then in May, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi proposed a coronavirus bailout of $1 trillion for the states and the cities. And back in May, it looked like Republicans in the Senate were going to cave and negotiate with Pelosi. And our 7 pieces at Forbes, giving oversight to the most highly compensated public employees in the blue states and the red states. So places like California and Illinois and New York City, San Francisco and Washington, D.C. and Seattle, and also red states like Texas. We are proud, after millions of views on those pieces, to have played a small role to educate the American people on those bailouts, on the highly compensated workforces, who is going to be getting bailed out. And today I'm proud to say that there has been no bailout of the blue states or the red states. Without further ado, I'd like to kick it over to our chairman, Thomas W. Smith, who will introduce Heather McDonald.
Well, I suspect Heather doesn't need an introduction. She's constantly on TV, constantly being interviewed by various institutions, lecturing in colleges. Her articles appear in the Wall Street Journal frequently and other newspapers. If you haven't read her book, The War on Cops and the Diversity Delusion, do yourself a favor. Read it. I don't think there's any other author or any other scholar who can duplicate her work, and not just because she's an extraordinary scholar. She has an incredible work ethic, constantly trying to find more facts, more knowledge, more information. She, for instance, spent countless hours with the police on the beat, and that's only a small part of her interests. She's been referred to as one of the greatest thinkers on criminal justice in America today. just as almost an afterthought, she went to Yale, Cambridge, Stanford Law. Heather?
Well, Tom, that was such a generous introduction, and it is the greatest privilege of my life to have the backing of the Thomas W. Smith Foundation for my work. So I'm honored to be here today and look forward to this conversation with a organization that is cracking the code and is returning our democracy to a state that should be its most primary function, which is to be transparent and to allow citizens to understand what their government is doing. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak with you today.
Well, Heather, thank you very much for being here. Very excited about the conversation. So for those of us that can't stay on the call for the full 30 minutes, give us, what is your number one, what's your top takeaway, the number one thing that you want each of us on the call today to remember from your body of work in relation to public safety and good policing?
Everything that the public thinks it knows about the police from the Black Lives Matter movement and the media is wrong. Reverse it and you have the truth. There is no government agency more dedicated to the proposition that Black Lives Matter than the police. The police are not the problem in this country, crime is. The biggest problem facing Blacks is not, as LeBron James says, white people. LeBron James says we're being hunted every time we walk outdoors. That is utter nonsense. The problem facing good, law-abiding, bourgeois, hardworking Blacks is Black criminals. It's a difficult thing to say, but that is the case. The police are the solution to that problem. They are not the problem itself.
Well, obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement has really put this defund the police public policy initiative on steroids. We took a look at OpenTheBooks.com back in August in 5 major urban areas, the quote unquote, what the president calls the lawless cities. These are the cities where the police are being told to stand down, where on basic individual rights, they're at risk in terms of life, liberty, and property, and the defense thereof. And so we, with the movement of defund the police, there's 2 U.S. senators, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz and U.S. Senator Joni Ernst out of Iowa, that have kind of turned the tables on that. They say if the police are going to be told to stand down and people don't have those basic freedoms, life, liberty, and property, then the federal government should consider actually defunding those urban areas. So we took a look based on that public policy proposition as to what was at stake, just simply to see what the level of federal money, taxpayer money, were going into Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, New York City, and Washington, D.C. And we found it was a stunning amount of money, $15 billion a year, just in those 5 major urban areas. In Washington, D.C., it's a tremendous amount of money, roughly $5,000 per person, over $18,500 of federal aid going into Washington, D.C. Basically for every family of 4, just a tremendous amount of aid. In New York City, about $6 billion a year of taxpayer money. Tell us, a lot of your work deals, Heather, with benchmarking statistics, specifically crime statistics. Tell us about the importance of crime statistics.
Well, first of all, Adam, let me say that the left's view that you can solve all problems by redistribution of wealth, which is what you're showing with your Open the Books accounting into these big cities, is ludicrous. The problem is not income inequality. The problem is not maldistribution of wealth. The problem is breakdown of basic bourgeois norms, above all the family. There is no amount of transfer of wealth that is going to overcome the cultural breakdown that is responsible for the insane level of crime that we are seeing today. Probably 40 young children have been shot fatally since George Floyd was killed in late May, all of them Black. in these insane gang drive-by shootings by 15-year-olds that have no respect for life and no ability to restrain their own impulses. That is a cultural problem. It is not a fiscal problem. The benchmark issue is critical. For viewers that don't understand, every time you hear a charge about police racism, whether it's in police stops, in arrests, in shootings, that comes out of the media, that comes out of the Black Lives Matter narrative, I guarantee you it will be based on the wrong benchmark. Here is the strategy of the left. They get their hands on a bunch of police data, the rate of stops, say, in a population, pedestrian stops, what percentage of stops made by the NYPD have Black subjects and what percentage have white subjects. I'll give you a specific example. In New York, Blacks are 23% of the population. They constitute a little over 50% of all police pedestrian stops. The left looks at that and compares the population to the police activity and says, aha, twice as high, police racism. Wrong benchmark. What we need to benchmark police activity against is crime, because policing today is data-driven. Police go where people are being most victimized, where criminals are operating, and where violent crime is happening. Here's the relevant benchmark in New York City for those police stops. Okay, again, police make about 50% of their stops are Black. Blacks commit 70% of all shootings in New York City. Add Hispanic shootings to Black shootings, and you account for nearly 100% of all drive-by shootings in New York. Those disparities exist in every single American city. When you look at police shootings, another thing we hear frequently, if you're reading the Washington Post, if you're reading the New York Times, God forbid, but I do it for you. As an act of masochism, I subject myself to these rags. You'll hear frequently that Blacks are shot at a rate 2.5 times that of whites. Implicit in that is a population benchmark. When you look at homicide rates, that ratio flips completely. And it turns out that when you take violent crime into account, because that is what's going to predict police use of force, whites are shot disproportionately. So the benchmark problem is absolutely essential. Keep it in mind whenever you hear a charge of police racism, and you've got to ask, but what are the crime rates?
Well said, Heather. And you know, here at OpenTheBooks.com, we're headquartered in Illinois, which is the Super Bowl of corruption. And the head of that snake, obviously, is Chicago. So look, we've been looking at these benchmark statistics as coupled up with budgets and payroll growth in the city of Chicago since 2011. And when Rahm Emanuel was elected in February of 2011 as mayor of Chicago, he had been promising on the campaign trail to expand the police force. But by August of 2011, he defunded the Chicago police force. Many people don't remember the lesson of that defunding. They cut 1,000 officers from the head count over 4 years in the city of Chicago. Rahm Emanuel, each year, according to our data on cash compensation, probably quote unquote saved about $125 million a year by cutting those 1,000 officers. But what happened? The policy had real painful consequences on the streets of Chicago, and it made national news because over the course of his first 4 years of his administration, there was 10,000 shootings in the city of Chicago. So I think we've tried this defund the police before, especially in one of America's largest cities, prominent city, Chicago, and certainly it had painful consequences. So Heather, how do you see transparency robustly playing a role in protecting public safety and in good police policy?
Well, the public is utterly ignorant about how vast the crime disparities are. And in a sense, you can't blame the public because the press has done a fantastic job over the last 3 decades of keeping the facts of crime off the stage. In the 90s, we started having the practice of newspapers no longer printing the race of criminal suspects. This was the most public policy, irresponsible journalistic practice. If a criminal is still at large and is not apprehended yet, every relevant possible piece of information about him should be put into the public sphere to help get him off the streets. Race is one of those aspects, but the press started repressing the race of suspects because the face of violent crime today, and I'm going to say something very bluntly, Adam, and it's uncomfortable to all us alleged white supremacists. I use that term highly ironically because this is not how a white supremacist would react. It is painful to tell these truths, but the face of violent crime, violent street crime in America, I'm talking about robberies, drive-by shootings, is Black and Hispanic. We're not allowed to see that. We're not allowed to see that. So here's what you do. So again, the benchmark problem is the fundamental problem. I would say that if public policy makers, if public officials, politicians want to have some impact on dismantling this destructive Black Lives Matter narrative that says the criminal justice system in general and policing in particular is racist, what the public officials have to do is demand that police departments publish the data on criminal offending and criminal victimization, so that people in any given city, whether it's Chicago or South Bend, Illinois, or Washington, D.C., understand why police are deployed in minority neighborhoods, understand why police are having more encounters with Black suspects than with white suspects. It's because of those crime disparities. In Chicago, you mentioned you're in Illinois, Adam. In Chicago, Blacks and whites are each about a little under a third of the population. Blacks commit 80% of all homicides and shootings, whites less than 1%. A Black Chicagoan is 50 times more likely to commit a homicide or a shooting than white Chicagoans. Those facts should be out there. It is something that public officials can do. They can mandate annual or semi-annual crime data conferences in which their local police chief sets out the truth.
Well said. And also from a financial perspective, we've issued this outstanding clarion call across the entire country for the last 5 years to open the books. So when we opened the books last week on the city of New York, here's what we found. Now keep in mind, the mayor and the city council, they've moved to defund the police by $1 billion. So we looked since 2016, here's what we found in New York City. In 2016, there was 76,000 six-figure public employees, and they cleaned off in 2016 about $8 billion. Here's the numbers today. It's been growth on steroids. 114,000 six-figure public employees, and on cash compensation, they earn $14.6 billion. Okay, so when they move to strip $1 billion out of the New York City police force at a time when crime is escalating, that should enrage every single New Yorker, especially the New Yorkers paying the income tax, because we have found that every single dollar collected by the city of New York on the income tax goes to fund just the six-figure public employees, the most highly compensated public employees in the state, clean off every dollar of the New York City income tax. The other thing about opening the books is that the weak, and when I say the weak, the corrupt, if you don't have good financial practices in place, you're going to be eaten in this current environment. Back in June, we did an oversight piece on the city of Seattle, their police department, and all the city agencies. And we found that there were police officers making up to $414,000 a year. And when the Seattle Times dug a little deeper, they found that this police officer was working 90 to 120 hours a week. 6 days, he worked more than 24 hours in a day. There was just bad financial controls across the board for years in the city police department. And so then in this environment, that was used to defund the Seattle police. Our oversight piece was also used by the other side to start the recall petition on the mayor for gross misapplication of public resources across the board. So transparency, it just goes to the point that transparency is nonpartisan. And when Heather says that transparency could be used to support public safety and good police policy, I think that's a very, very important takeaway. Heather, I kind of laugh asking this final question of you today, and then we'll get to the question and answer period. After last night's debate, my question is, look, it's an election year. Are you happy? Are you satisfied with the message from the politicians? As we all know that law and order is on the ballot, are you happy with the arguments being made in this election year?
Well, I'm certainly not happy with last night's debates. I think Trump obviously has the absolutely right angle on this, that law and order is essential. And I hope that people have been doing their own research to understand how critical a moment this is. I'm terrified, Adam, that we are sliding, if we're not already there, into a state of civil anarchy. It's not being covered. Every single day, officers are being assaulted, assassination attempts are being made. It's going on here in Southern California. There's constant gun attacks on officers. These are not covered. The riots that are breaking out at any given criminal justice decision that the mob doesn't like doesn't get covered. Lancaster riots, riots in Louisville, barely covered. So unless you're getting your alternative media, the public, I think, thinks that this is a non-issue. So I hope that people do understand and that they reject the ridiculous idea that to talk about law and order is somehow racist, as if those good law-abiding Black people who I come across every time I go to a police community meeting in the inner city area, who beg for more police, who beg for more enforcement, who want the criminals off the streets, who want disorderly people and youth off the streets. Those people have as much of a right to live free from fear as anybody else. But with what's going on now, Adam, it is very, very serious. It should be the only issue in this election, I think, that and the insane, scientifically invalid coronavirus shutdowns that are going to destroy the economy. I feel like a donkey between two toxic bales of hay. Every day I can't decide which is worse, the effects on America of the coronavirus shutdowns or the effects of the breakdown of law and order. They are both an absolutely terrifying situation, but certainly the riots that's going on, the attacks on Trump supporters, on whites, I'm going to be very, again, blunt about this. Diners in Washington, D.C. are being attacked on a daily basis simply for being white. We are really heading towards a civil war, if not a race war in this country, Adam.
Well said. In terms of Heather's work on the pandemic, for everybody on the call, you should Google the Hillsdale and Primus issue in July, where Heather's work on the pandemic was featured. I think it should be required reading. Thomas W. Smith, will you please give the conclusion to our call today?
Well, I would just like to share a thought with you. Eventually, this exploding debt, the bureaucracy, the controls that we're being subjected to will have to be dealt with. And when you do that, you're going to squeeze every government program. And who knows how that will impact the culture as well as the government. Transparency can be transformational. It's never been more crucial. Transparency has never been more crucial to survival of this country. And that's the role of the Open the Books has never been more crucial. We want to expand. We have the technological capacity to do that. And I think the results can be dramatic. The voting public, the media, academics, politicians, would-be politicians, bureaucrats will then live in a totally different world. I think transparency can be as much of a game changer as was the printing press. I think, thank you for your support of our effort to produce a cultural transformation, which I think is crucial to the survival of this country as our founders envisioned it and as we have lived it. So thanks again for attending, and look forward to talking to you on our next visit.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.